Welcome to an episode of Life Stories with Marty. I'm Marty here in Australia, and I'm joined by my colleague and friend, which I'm very excited, Leo Quinlan from Moral Injury International. And Leo, we have a special guest. And first of all, it's great to be with you. You're over in Ireland, in Melbourne, it's a bit cold, and I know you guys over there are heating up a bit, but we'll get a revenge on you. So, Leo, tell us about who our guests tonight and what it makes why we're doing this.
Yes, indeed, Marty. Good evening to you and good morning from Galway in Ireland. We're very privileged today to have with us Lieutenant Colonel Dan Harvey, retired. Now, Dan was born and raised in County Cork. He was educated in the Christian Brothers College in Cork, later in the Irish Military College in the Curragh Camp. He went to National University of Ireland in Galway. He attended University College Cork and Maynooth University. He served in the Irish Defence Forces, retiring with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. He served in Ireland during the Troubles and saw active service overseas as a peacekeeper in Central Africa, Lebanon, Kosovo, South Caucasus, and with a stint in Vienna. As an author, Dan has written extensively about the history of the Defence Forces, the Troubles, and the involvement of Irish men and women in significant battles such as Waterloo and D-Day. While serving in the Irish Army, Dan also worked as the museum curator for several award-winning military exhibitions in Ireland, including at Collins Barracks and the National Museum of Ireland. He is a long-time contributor to On Cussin For, which is the magazine of the Irish Defence Forces, and he was military advisor on the 2006 Irish war drama film, The Wind That Shakes the Barley. And really, we are very privileged and honoured to have Dan with us today.
And before we cross over to Dan over in Dublin, what we'll do is I'd like to play for people all over the world that don't know what Jarraville is about. Let's just play this clip and we'll cross over at the end of this and have a chat with Dan.
See? What? The UN was established to ensure that the nations of the world would never again engage in another world war. As a neutral country, we are the second wave of Irish soldiers to be sent into the Congo.
Jesus fucking snake!
The compound is a joke. We're wide open.
They would never dare attack United Nations company.
You've never been in battle. Do you have a plan?
Just to pray there's no need for us.
Save us from peril and from war.
Attack!
Of every ocean star.
I require your surrender.
If you continue to attack, we will continue to respond.
You do realize that you are outnumbered by a factor of 20.
You're hanging us out to dry. We need reinforcements.
There are larger things here at play than you can possibly imagine.
I don't give a damn about the larger things.
Tell me what I'm supposed to do.
We each have our part to play in history. Yours is happening right now.
They're coming!
Dan, welcome to the show, and what a pleasure to have you on.
Delighted to be here, Marty.
And I have my good friend and colleague here, Leo Quinlan. And Leo, I'll put you in and we're going to kick off. We've listened to your intro and everything. So, Leo, over to you.
Okay, thanks very much, Marty. Good morning, Dan. Both of us are in Ireland and Marty is in Melbourne, Australia. Dan, we're absolutely privileged and honoured really to have you with us today. And I've been told to kind of kick off because you and I know each other for many, many years. And you reminded me the other day that the first time we actually worked together, I think it was about 1987, when between us we ran the Cork 800 military tattoo in Portlakeeve in Cork, which was an interesting spectacle at the time. how we'd like to do this today, with your permission, is to, let's say, hand it over to you. Tell us about your life. Tell us whatever it is you want to say about your life. In the introduction that we've already made, we've mentioned about being an author and a curator and an army officer and where you were educated, where you were born, and so on. But that's just your bio. But just for you to tell us what you want about your life and what has brought you to where you are today, and of course, the latest book you've written. And we might jump in occasionally to ask questions. And then near the end, we want to ask you a special question, but that'll come later on. So basically, Dan, very welcome, and it's over to you.
Well, we'll start in Cork, no better place. And I had a very rich upbringing. I had 3 brothers and a sister, and we were all very sporty. So at any one point in time, there was hockey sticks and tennis rackets and rugby balls and golf sticks. And our neighbours would say they didn't need a calendar. All they had to do was look into the Harvey garden and they'd know what time of year it was, because that's what we were doing and playing. So it's only when you look back now, you see I didn't have one day that I was bored. And transfer that then into the army. And I can say the same about that, because the army was a small army trying to do a lot. And we were double, triple, quadruple jobbing from the word go. And it meant that you had a very rich existence and experience. And I'll start, if you like, briefly now with the cadet school. The first day. Now, I really wanted the army.
And that was on the Cork camp, Dan, where I was born.
Well, no, it was a November day, cold and bleak. And I arrived up into the Curragh, and it was very hard to discern one building from another, because they were all kind of a purpose-built. I thought there might be the cadet school, but not really. It was merged in with all the other buildings. But anyway, I arrived, and there was one owl there, Mick McGinley from Milford in County Donegal. And I said to him, Mick, isn't that amazing now? I said, you're after arriving from one end of the country, and I'm after arriving from the other. And where are the rest? We're the 2 furthest away, and we're on time. And the next thing, around the corner comes a marching body, and there were the rest. They were already in 2 weeks. We were replacements. So that wasn't how I imagined my first day would go. But anyway, just prior to that, the cadets interview at the time, there was only one tougher one, and that was for Aer Lingus pilots. So they were the 2 toughest interviews at the time. And both jobs, to get an army cadetship in the late 70s, early 80s was a great thing to aspire to. But it was a rigorous test, though. And so I remember the second interview was particularly difficult. And I was very keen and charged up. It was the current affairs question that was the one you couldn't practice for. But I read everything about the current affairs that was possible. And the next thing I know is the interview was progressing nicely, and we're coming to the current affairs question. And I was saying, are they going to talk to me about Nicaragua or the Middle East or what? And no, they said, Dan, what do you think of the fisherman's blockade in Dunleary Pier? I was completely sidetracked. And I didn't know really what they were talking about. And I certainly didn't know how to answer it. So I just said, sure, they're worse than the farmers. We should send in Eli Ifa and break the blockade. And I didn't know, was it the right answer or the wrong answer? But as soon as I said it, I felt it was the wrong answer. And I looked at all their faces, and they were completely inscrutable. They never gave me any hint or anything. And I said to myself, there it goes. That's my cadetship gone. If I could grab that question back, it would be great, but I can't. So I left. And the following morning, the LEIFA broke the blockade in Dunleary. So
Wow.
I was hugely relieved. Yeah. Anyway, so that was the early days in the cadet school.
And
And
Dan, can I just say, Dan, can I, if you don't mind if I just jump in for a second, is why did you want to join the army? What inspired you
I
to
tell
do
you now, I grew up in the 60s. So I was a 50s child. And so the 60s and 70s. So we had the Vietnam War, we had the war in the Middle East, and we already had a decade of the Troubles. So I was, I won't say attracted to it, but I was fascinated by it and fearful of it. And I had played team sports, and in one or two of the teams that I played on, there were one or two army officers, and they were a good recommendation for a life that would have camaraderie and meaning. And that's why I went for it. And I found both, I have to say.
Wow.
So, cadet school over, quite successful. Went off to Galway to university. And then I went to my unit. And it was a border unit. It was the 27th Battalion. And that was in Dundalk on the northeast, but it had a more inland post associated with it in Castle Blaney, otherwise known as Blaney. And it was on the southern side of what is termed now the South Armagh Bandit Country. So it was a busy little post, just what a young officer would want. But I remember August 1981, we had the hunger strikes. And the hunger strikers were dying since, I think, May and June. They had them spaced out. But there had been an election in Northern Ireland, and Bobby Sands became an MP. But there also had been one in the south. And there were two Sinn Féin candidates, and one was on hunger strike, and he died. Kieran Doherty was his name. And he died on the 2nd of August. And all along the border, the towns went mad. And we got a call in Castleblaney, a small little post, to say there's a crowd gathering in the town and they're angry. The guards contacted us. So I was it for the August weekend. So I looked at my sergeant and I said, we better send off the recall plan. And sure enough, all the soldiers came in from Castleblaney and its environments. And we got them into riot gear, and I remember thinking to myself, now, what do I need to worry about here? And I said, right, I'll be the attacker. And I look at it through the eyes of the attackers. And I said, well, if I was attacking this place full of wooden huts and that, I'd burn it to the ground and I'd use petrol bombs. And there was an image that stuck in my mind from the rioting in the north, where there was a riot in progress. The British Army were on the streets, and there was a petrol bomb exploded near to a soldier. His trousers caught fire and it spread up into his torso and arms. But a quick thinking NCO ran to a Land Rover and with an extinguisher doused him and saved him probably from terrible injury. So I said, we have that potential here. So in all the melee that was going on, I grabbed the sergeant and I said, Sarge, get the fire extinguishers and centralize them. He said, good idea, and off he went. Continuing to get the riot gear on and place them in the right place. He came back to me, I've got good news, I've got bad news, he said. We have 15, but only 7 work. I said, fair enough, I said, you know the swill barrels by the dining hall? I said, get those, empty them, put water in them, and put blankets beside them. Good idea, he said, and off he went. And we got stuck into our preparations. So as a young officer, I rang to Dundalk, to my headquarters, and I was told, fuck off, we've got problems of our own over here. That wasn't quite what I expected. And then I rang Monaghan, which is on our other side, in a different battalion area, and they said, can't help, there's a big crowd rioting downtown. and we were expecting any minute to have to get engaged. So we were on our own. So I rang the guards and I said, how are things there? Oh, they said, the crowd is getting bigger and angrier. I said, Jesus. So, all right, that was it. It was going to be force and on force. So we waited and we waited and we waited. And the next thing, the corporal from the operations room ran out to me and said, sir, they've all gone into buses and taxis and headed off to the riot in Monaghan. Well, such relief. A little bit of anticlimax, but I was delighted at the same time. So that's fine. I was on duty for that weekend, the August weekend, and the following morning I got to take my weekend. So I headed away for 3 days, and when I came back, the main gate policeman said, go straight over to the commanding officer. He's back from his leave and he wants to see you immediately. So I thought he probably wanted a brief on what had happened. So I knocked on the door and I got a very abrupt and I didn't put a foot on the floor, and he said, why shouldn't I charge you for the cost of 11 blankets? And I said to myself, my God, the sergeant must have put them into the swivel bin rather than beside them. And then he said to me, only joking, he said, well done. So that was my time. There were plenty of other stories from the border, but that was one that it had a funny ending in the end. So
Can I
yeah.
interject here?
Yeah.
Dan, before you were on the board in Castleblayney, I used to be OC Castleblayney, and I was OC Dundalk as well.
Right.
I was OC Dundalk and Castleblayney. The connection with Jadaville is that Commodore Liam Donnelly from Jadaville was company commander in Dundalk. I was his 2IC in Castleblayney. He went on a month's pre-discharge leave, and I had to take over both. That's just by the way. But the incident you're talking about in Monaghan, did you ever come across my father on that night? Because the riots that were in Monaghan, he happened to be in Castleblayney, maybe not the night you're talking about, and they had to send a rifle platoon out to Monaghan to help the riot platoon that was there. And they were trying to stuff burning papers into armored cars and things like that. Yeah. Was that the same night?
No, not the same night.
No.
But I mean, there was plenty of trouble went on all throughout that period. Yeah. And Monaghan, funnily enough, was a town that the army was the longest getting integrated into. Yeah. So it was the one that had the most resistance.
Okay. Well, you've had your trouble. So then you went from there, and you went. I see in the introduction I gave where you went overseas, etc., etc. So how was all that?
Yeah, but prior to going overseas, I moved back home to Cork, as all Cork people do. But there was a standard procedure in Cork that before you could take a platoon overseas, you had to take a platoon into Portage prison. Oh. It was a good idea because it was a serious military operational duty, and it was a great testing ground. It was a horrible duty, though. I mean, if we wanted to go to prisons, we'd join the prison service. But it was only the soldiers on the walls and in the watchtowers that kept the high security IRA prisoners in. And sometimes there used to be interaction between the...
And Dan, sorry to interrupt you, because I know on the border, for people overseas, you mentioned Portlaoise and the prison, is then you have the guards. So if you can just explain to the overseas people like what you're doing. So they had soldiers, you had prison guards, but then soldiers overseeing armed soldiers. Is that correct?
That's right. It was they say it at the time it was the highest security prison in Europe. Yeah. And it was there was a big concentration of subversive prisoners there. And these guys were dangerous. They were murderers, bombers, bank robbers, and these guys were constantly thinking of ways to get out. So it was a very tense place and fraught because these fellows were not fools, and they had had a successful prison break at one stage. a number were thwarted. As it turned out in the course, I won't talk too much about it, the INLA were in there also, and there was stratification between them because they were different splits. But they brought in a group of them at one stage, and would you believe it? There was a bit of repair work going on, and the repair people left ladders and kango hammers and all kinds of things around the place. And the INLA prisoners went to grab them, and the guards and the prison wardens went to stop them. So the alert went off. And I can tell you it's a scary thing when the alert goes off and the alarm sounds, because it means something serious is at hand. So there's standard procedures that you have to react to. And our platoon did that. But it's a funnier story that I want to relate, really. And we were there late winter, early spring of 1984. And, sometimes you get a pet day. And this was a pet day. The sun was shining, and it was actually almost balmy. And the main Cork-Dublin road runs across the front of the prison. So you can look out on your elevator post and you can see the traffic. But there's this one particular car we heard before we saw it. And the guy had a sense of humor because he had the radio on full, and it was Queen's new hit, I Want to Break Free. So all the soldiers started singing along with it to annoy the prisoners.
So now the man you
that's
said there
happened.
about bringing them to Port was one of the toughest. What did you have anything to do with on the Cork camp, because they were transferred from the Cork camp prison?
They were, and from Mountjoy. So they had been moved prior to my tour of duty in there.
Yeah.
But tour of duty over, all a success. No one got out, and I was very glad. I remember my first break from it. I just put on my training gear and ran and ran and ran and ran. And the only thing that stopped me, I ran off outside of Cork for about, I must have done a mini marathon and a half. But just the joy of freedom and no responsibility for 3 days was what I enjoyed, because you'd be pent up as a platoon commander watching and trying not to show it. But anyway, a successful trip done and selected then to go overseas. And you were congratulated for being selected for going overseas at the time. And there was even a going away party. There was, so it was quite a big deal. Now, funnily enough, there was kind of a quirk of rotation where a platoon from the south would rotate every so often with a company from the west. So that was the case with me. My platoon went with the west, and it was with Doc O'Callaghan, and he became a general afterwards. But so it was 1984-85, and the Israelis had invaded in 1980, withdrawn. They invaded again in 1982, and having achieved the mission of kicking the PLO out, instead of withdrawing, they lingered and got embroiled in Lebanon. And they were confronted by the Yamal and the Hezbollah and all those suicide bombings and all that. They gave birth to that. So they were slowly but surely developing into Israel's Vietnam. So for our trip, there were 3 characteristics in our area. There was the presence of Israeli-backed militia groups. There was the withdrawal of Israeli convoys, and this was not a negotiated withdrawal. These were tactical withdrawals. So they would just suddenly abandon a post in the middle of the night and withdraw southwards. And while they were withdrawing southwards, they already had a buffer zone 5 kilometers into Lebanon, and now they wanted to extend that to 10 kilometers in. And that meant confrontation with UNIFIL, and particularly with Irish PAT, because we had observation posts and checkpoints in the areas they wanted to take over. And they would unleash their militias to try to secure that. So there was a lot of confrontation. And it meant that as a young officer, and you could go through your entire military career without ever coming under fire. But I came under fire a number of times during that trip. And so it was an initiation like no other in life. And every soldier is wondering how he's going to command or how he's going to react under that fire. Will he keep it together? And particularly as a platoon commander in charge of 33 troops, how will you react? And would you become fearful? Would you come into yourself? Would the platoon sergeant have to take over? But the occasion came and went, and composure was maintained. And in fact, as a platoon commander, you have so much to be doing. There's radio going, there's landlines ringing. People want to know what's happening. If they just let you alone to develop the situation and report back. But I learned all those things very quickly. Anyway, so that was the big thing, to really come under fire. And you were dealing with mad, psychopathic warlords backed and urged on by the Israelis to do their bidding. And there were checkpoint confrontations, there was shootings and kidnappings, and they would try to move into towns and do what the Black and Tans used to do to Irish villages long ago. They would centralize all the people, they would interrogate the men, they would search houses, and if they suspected it, they would blow it up, and then they would take prisoners away. But it was our job to stop that, to get in and stop that. So it was a hectic 6 months, and there were two trouble spots. I was in one, and Mick McGinley from Donegal was in the other. So the two boys who arrived late for the cadet school were coping with the worst excesses of trouble. But I was very, very proud of my platoon. They did very well. But just one other thing that I'd like to mention about that was there was a particularly heightened situation where they wanted to take over the town or the village we were in, that we had checkpoints. And they marshaled all the villagers together and they moved them against the two checkpoints. I had control of one, and they had the people up front and they were shooting behind them and forcing them onto our checkpoints and to take over. Now, there's no training for that in the cadet school. You have to face this one yourself. And I can tell you, they were coming, shots were being fired, and I didn't know what to do. And when you're afraid, you go cold. Your heart starts to pound, and you're breathing quickly, and your peripheral vision actually widens. And out of the corner of my eye, I spotted the worst soldier in my platoon. God, he had my heart broken. He was always getting into trouble and getting me into trouble as well. But what did I see him do? I saw him take up a perfect fire position. His weapon handling was brilliant, and you could see he was resolved to do his job. And a thought occurred to me, well, there, we'll call him Murphy. I said, well, there's Private Murphy doing his job. I better go and do mine now. And immediately, I chose a house further back along the road, and I said to the sergeant, we're commandeering that, and we're withdrawing from here. And he said, but you're not allowed to. Well, I said, we're allowed to now, so move. And that's what we did. We moved back, but it's all down to Private Murphy doing his job. So you can gain inspiration from anything, and not necessarily those above you. So, but I was very proud of the platoon, and there were other platoons that had performed well that trip, and we came back to Ireland, and there wasn't a word. You know, we just came back to Ireland, and I always said one of these days.
You just did your job, and then you came back. Yeah. And we got to move on a little bit because I want to go into your thing. So, Leo, can you jump in there, please?
Well, okay.
Yeah, I know. I've been listening. I'm like intrigued with Dan.
No, Dan has touched on a lot of things, and this is the kind of conversation that could go on for a couple of hours, because I know from my own experience that there'll be multiple incidents that Dan could talk about. But Dan, just because of the time factor, can you tell us about your other overseas service, so on, maybe for 2 or 3 minutes, and then we'll come back to something I want to ask you.
Right. So I was just using those to highlight coming under fire and the situations you'd find yourself in that you didn't really expect to. But anyway, I swore I was never going back overseas after that. But sure, I went back 2 more times. It just gets under your skin. But each trip is different, and they all had their own memories. So that's fine. We were lucky, our generation, we were lucky and unlucky in that, unlike now, we had the Troubles ongoing. So when you came back to Ireland, you got on with your duties, and you were part of the aids the civil power backing up the Gardaí, again out of the public view for the most part, but very necessary to be there, because it was only force of arms that kept the other unofficial army with their weapons from taking over the state. And people don't have an appreciation of that. And I'll come back to that a little later. But between home domestic security duties, between an expanding, we were very fortunate, there was a big expanse of overseas missions cropping up everywhere. So we had, again, a rich variety of experiences. But you add to that then your normal duties, and in my case, your additional duties. And I became the media officer for the South. I was interested in museums, and I found myself being involved in the officers' mess as well. So there was never a day, or an hour even, that you could say, well, things are all right now. Because the minute you say that, things will go wrong. But and then you had to do your own career courses. And in 1995, I was doing my career course from for necessary course, 6 months residential for captain to commandant. And part of the course, as is always on all courses, there's media training, but there's also lecturing. And we got a task to deliver a lecture of your choice on any military matter. So one of our class stood up and he told us about Jadov. 1995 now.
Oh.
And it was Paul Carey, son of Noel Carey. And it was all our first time hearing the story. We were completely stunned. And once we recovered from our being stunned, we were shocked. Why did we not know about this? I mean, the lessons to be learned, such a story, and an Irish one. And surely there's a story in why we don't know this. So there it lay, and continued to lay, and you got on with your career. Well, that was my first encounter with Jadov. And life moved on, rearing a family, and then out of the blue, in 2007 to 2009, I got an opportunity as part of staff to assist Lieutenant General Pat Nash to go to a headquarters in Paris of a European force going into Chad. There was a lot of trouble in Sudan and Darfur on the western edge, and the refugees were moving from Darfur into Chad, and the Janjaweed militia were coming in and raiding the refugee camps. So a European force went in to stop that, and he was put in charge of it. So it was an occasion we were allowed to bring our families. Now, I had 3 teenage girls at the time, and I became the worst dad.
Eva, Lynn, and Mary Claire.
That's it. Well done. And I had a little fellow called Hugo. He was 5. But I took them away from their friends, And that was a big mortal sin. But I knew this would be good for them in the long run. And anyway, we compromised. I said, you can bring your friends over and you can go back to them. And I remember after a year, one of them said at tea quite casually, they said, isn't Cork very small after all? And I went, yes, they're getting it. They're getting it. Anyway, a year later, 2 years now and all, mission finished, mission a success. And it was great that it was a success. And, there was a good Irish staff in amongst the international staff that helped General Nash to deliver this mission. But anyway, I announced at tea one day, right, it's time to go home, girls. You'd be delighted to hear. And there was a stunned silence. And they said, Dad, you're going home. We're staying. And that's what happened.
Cheerio!
Yeah, that's what happened. So my address changed from Blackrock, Cork, to Avenue Fluka in Paris.
Yeah.
And Dan,
So I commuted.
Sorry, Dan. Look, I'm conscious of the time factor. You've written up to now something like 16 books, and jumping forward a little bit, can you just tell us quickly about the books and then maybe the latest book that you've got done before I ask you a rather special question?
Okay. So I always wanted, I had a history in military history and particularly the Irish participation in it. But if you looked up any book on famous battles, there was never any Irish mentioned. So there came a point in time when I decided, well, if I can't get them, I'll start to write them. So that was one. So I started writing about the Irish who fought at Waterloo, the Irish who fought at Rourke Street, D-Day, Arnhem. So that was one strand of themed writing that I did. But the other one then was, like that, what the Irish did overseas that we weren't talking about. And that was particularly important because I knew from my museum endeavors, it was important to capture first-hand stories. And people were dying and they were being lost. So the Battle of Atiri in Lebanon, the Battle of the Tunnel in Congo, and various other books like that. We have one soldier lost in Lebanon that we never recovered. And that was Joyce. And so that was worthy of a book in itself. Because for anyone who's been there, we've left a little bit of ourselves behind. But at least he knows he's not on his own. So that was the type of books that I was writing. And I mean, before you knew it, there was 16 books written. It proved to be a marvelous bridge into retirement because what it meant, retirement meant to me, was that I now had full-time able devotion to be writing. And I was writing 2 books, Leo, when I got a call from a man down in Kerry saying, will you come down and talk to me? We have a problem. So we did, and I suspended writing the 2 books and I started writing a third. And that's what has us here today.
Okay. Amazing. And we're talking about your latest novel, Jadaville, Benchmark for Bravery. Let me say that the name is incredible. The title is absolutely incredible. It certainly is, in an Irish scenario, in Irish history, a good benchmark for bravery, the Jadaville experience. So, as you know, Marty and I, apart from Marty's life stories that he's doing, which is what's now, we also have another strand to our endeavors, which is all about moral injury. This came about as a result of me and my interaction with the American Army when they told me, they said, hey, Jadaville, that's the perfect example of collective moral injury. They told me that in January 2021.
Yeah.
And I started investigating it. And from that, Marty and I and 2 others, we started this podcast. But that's beside the point. But we always say that moral injury in a military sense, and it spreads into every walk of life, but moral injury in a military sense, in simplistic terms, is where soldiers suffer some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority. The betrayal can take the form of denial, delay things, don't talk about it, hide it, etc., etc. But without getting into all of that, when you were, let's say, doing research for your latest novel, which is going to be launched next month in of all places, Cork. I wonder why Cork. Anyway,
Yeah.
so when you were doing the research for this, I know that you interviewed people, veterans of Jadaville, families of Jadaville, and you did your own research in other places. Did you form any opinion or in relation to moral injury, or is there something you'd like to say about moral injury, generally speaking, or specific to Jadaville, just for the listeners?
So by way of answering that question and by way of introduction, I mentioned a moment ago about capturing the first-hand accounts of people for various other incidents overseas. And that involved interviewing people who were long retired. And I recognized in some of them that that post-traumatic stress was still evident. And I was a trained military police investigator. I was a military policeman for 9 years, in and out of the Corps, as is the way with officers. And so interviewing was a skill, and I found that I was good at it. And I was able to detect things with the sixth sense. And there were people who were troubled when they were giving me their experiences of incidents that I was capturing. So I knew, and a number of these people had never declared themselves to have suffered from post-traumatic stress. And that's the way they wanted it. Other people had got help and were cured from it. So post-traumatic stress existed. I had seen it. Now, in the course of researching this book, this topic of moral injury rose. And I said to myself, but is that not post-traumatic stress? So I undertook a lot of research into this, and they are two completely different things. You could be a victim of moral injury almost without being suffering from post-traumatic stress, but you would have had an experience of trauma. It may not have traumatized you, but you might fall then into the category. So whether you were suffering from post-traumatic stress or suffering from trauma, if it then turns out that that authority that placed you in fear of your life, that's what traumatic stress is. It's fear of danger or fear of being injured. So it's fear of physical death. Whereas post-traumatic or moral injury is probably a more insidious one. And you had a good description for it there. You said it's the trauma of the soul. So there are two ways you can be traumatized by this. That's by betrayal by a higher authority, as in denial of what you did, or you were ostracized for what you did, or they forced you to do something that your conscience had an aversion to. So it's as well as you saying it's a problem with the soul. It's a problem with your conscience as well. So it's a trauma. That's how one is trauma of fear, and the other one is trauma of conscience.
And do you think, Dan, that runs through generational, which is in my case, but it runs down through the effects? Because obviously, if someone goes through that trauma, it's carried down and it can go on to generations.
It absolutely can, because how does that trauma manifest itself? Manifests itself in dysfunctional homes, dysfunctional marriages, dysfunctionality of the individual. And one person in a family, in the waves that go out from anything like that, they extend outwards and continue to extend outwards. And if you're the son or daughter of a victim of post-traumatic stress or collective moral injury, then you yourself have suffered and may be continuing to suffer and may even pass that suffering down to your children, maybe in a different form, maybe unconsciously. So it is intergenerational, undoubtedly. Chernobyl is an unfortunate classic example of collective moral injury.
You're so right.
Very interesting, Dan, in what you're saying, because it kind of validates what Marty and I have been finding ourselves from interviewing people, not just in military areas, but in other areas, exactly as you've described. But yesterday I was interviewed yesterday for somebody who's doing research about many, many things in Galway University, and this lady mentioned moral injury. And she said something very interesting. She said, first time I've ever heard this, that now evidence shows that moral injury can become part of the family DNA. And it goes down into the next generation and the next generation if it is not handled. Now, this is the first time I ever heard that it becomes part of the DNA. That's frightening, actually.
Yeah.
So,
But may I just jump in there and just say, is with moral injury it's once you understand it, as Dan was saying there, you have post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's treated normally by medication. But moral injury, and I can only speak for myself, from transgenerational, I never understood my dad. When I understood, because I don't think and I don't believe, as I think you were kind of alluding earlier there, Dan, is transgender, because there's no duty of care. And it's not just duty of care to the actual soldiers, the men and women that are doing that. It's the families, the spouses. It's a combined thing, and that can go on as we were saying, is you can't hold a relationship, and that affects children. Yeah.
okay.
No, it's the.
Go ahead, Dan.
No, it's they're all innocent, but particularly the children of people who have been exposed like that.
Yes.
Now, post-traumatic stress is treatable with medication and therapies.
Yeah.
So there's good ground made there. But collective moral injury, I think it needs to be addressed yet to good effect.
Okay. Right. Listen, I'd say, Marty, we're probably running very short on time. Are we?
We are indeed. And just before I say this, from Australia is Dan, and you probably don't know this, but on say in New Zealand, New South Wales, a doctor, when you go in, you obviously need medication for post-traumatic stress. So there was one box when they qualify, it's for post-traumatic stress. Now, and we had the girls on from Moral Injury Australia, is now they have changed that so they can treat, there's two boxes, moral injury, which has now become huge over here, moral injury or post-traumatic stress. And I find, if you don't mind me saying, moral injury is, you can talk to people and understand it. And I find personally is you find forgiveness if you understand. And I'm not trying to preach, but moral injury is, it helps generations. And Leah would say to you, like, growing up, you got to look at all those things. Moral injury, your parents never told you love you never got a hug. And as you were alluding to there, Dan, or saying, is those what men went and not just in the army, police, fire brigade, whatever, nurses, is then they're bottling that up inside, and then somebody has to release it in certain ways.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Dan, you're going to say something?
No, it's okay.
No, look, Marty, I think we're nearly finished, Marty, our time.
We're just coming up now, and what we're going to do is I'm going to get both of you. I want to just ask, but both of you, and we're going to play at the end of the show. And I'd like to ask you another question, Dan, is I've seen the pictures that we're putting up there when you were in the military ball in Vienna and with Eva Lynn and Mary. You are a very proud father, and obviously with you goes. Does that keep you what you're doing? Is that your
Absolutely. Just very interestingly, they went off to university in America at different stages. So I would naturally go and visit them, and they would introduce me to their friends and their friends' parents. And the friends' parents would say in the company, "And what do you do, Dan?" And I said, "Well, I'm in the military." And they'd go, "Well, thank you for your service."
Yeah.
So my children that was never said in Ireland. So my children looked at me with a whole new esteem that they hadn't before. So that was an interesting thing where the service of the militaries in other countries is deemed of worth and respect. So,
and Dan, we're just running out. We're just running out of time now,
yeah.
And I'm going to get Leo to come in to do the final word, but I need to put in something that's you went in the lockdown that, and you're right in Paris, and just to throw into that, if we can do it quickly, is why do you do writings? What gives you the passion? Where did you get that from? And why are you telling other people's stories? And from a Jarraville like Leo's, it's fantastic that you put in the work to do that. Where do you get that passion from?
Well, two things, and we touched on it. My platoon story would never be told, and unless I decided to write it. So it was pride in my own service, pride in the service and the efforts that people were putting in. When I looked at the caliber of people who were in the army throughout those years, I said, God, they're great men. They really are. And I was glad they were on my side. And Ireland needed them, and Ireland had them when it was challenged, both in the age of civil power and overseas. So I was very proud of my service, and I wanted that pride to be known about. Again, from a heritage point of view, if you're researching this time, these eras, 100 years hence, where will you focus your research on? So I wanted to leave something behind that told the truth of the situation. Yes, it's good that journalists write it, but it's our story and we should tell it. So that's what I'm doing.
And thank you very much. I'm going to let Leo finish over here, but thank you very much for writing Jarraville. It's a story, an untold story, and you can see I have the flag there of everything, and we're breaking history over here, marching Anzac Day, and getting recognition for the men. I know there's lots of other cases that need to be told, but I want to thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Leo before I close up the show because we're out of time, guys.
Okay, Dan, look, I could listen to you for hours. And sorry that this is so short, but that's all the time we have. We're honored, very privileged for this, to be able to listen to you today. And I'm quite sure that everybody that'll be watching this in the future, and we go to a very large watching and listening base, if that's the way to put it. So just to give you the opportunity in one or two sentences to say something as just to finalize everything, and we much appreciate it. And listen, thanks, Dan, for everything.
When I was in the barracks, various barracks, and we'll come back to Harvey and McGinley at the cadet school. Well, we were behind in our foot march, in our foot drill. So this NCO, Sergeant Burke, used to call us out from class. It became a catch cry in the amongst our class. Harvey and McGinley fall out, and we'd fall out and we'd catch up on our foot drill. But we didn't understand the man. And I just said to Mick, look, whatever we do, we'll both do it. So he'd bark an order and I'd say, we'll go left. And we'd go left. Now, eventually, whether we improved without realizing it or whether he just got fed up with us, I don't know. But when I was researching the names for the of the A company, there was Corporal Patrick Burke Kerry. That was the man. So the Jadaville people were amongst us all the time, and we didn't know them, and we didn't know their stories.
Yep.
And this is what this book is about.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Dan. Thank you very, very much. And
well, Dan, thank you very much. And I must say, we're going to put up at the end, we've got a collage of your photographs and your beautiful children. Yes, and I love them, and we're going to put that up there. So can you just tell for audio ones, where they get your book? We'll show it on the end. How did they get your book? And it comes out on the 25th of June, is that correct?
That's right. The official launch is in Cork, the best place in the world. And it will be in certain...
I just blocked you there.
It will be in certain bookshops thereafter, but you can also get it from the publisher's website, www.memma, MENMA.
I've got that.
And that's where you'll get it for sure.
And you'll see that on the end of this show. And look, guys, as Leo said, Dan, it's just an honor and a pleasure. And keep up. And I know you've got some more. You're on your next book now. And
next week I'm taking a break.
People.
Yeah. Yes, next week I'm taking a break. And actually, I have advised people, because we were an interesting generation of army people, the stories they have, I have encouraged people to write down their stories, not for publication, but for their children and their grandchildren. And so I decided to take my own advice, and that's the next book. So it's called Please Explain, A Lifetime in the Army.
Well, there you go. My audience is, and thank you so much. And look, thank you to our audience here in Australia, New Zealand, and all over the world. And follow Dan Harvey, and you see all his books, and we'll put up the link at the end of it. And you can also listen to this podcast, the video, but you can watch the Spotify on the audio podcast, which should be out very shortly. And Dan, please keep up the good work you're doing, and what an honor.
My pleasure, Marty, and lovely to be here.
Thank you very much, and good night to our audience, and we'll see you on the next episode.